Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind Movement Health podcast. I'm excited to have a special guest on the show or a returning guest to the podcast. Jen, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Kate. I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited to have you on. Your first episode was so well received, and you have a new book coming out, which we're going to chat about today.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to hear it. I always love chatting with you, and you've been on Salad with a Side of Fries, my podcast as well. So it's always nice to connect across the globe and, help everybody in between.
Yeah, and we're both into health, so geeking out about health is what we do. So, before we kind of dive in, for any listeners that may have missed your first episode, can you just give a bit of a brief introduction about, who you are, what you do, and then introduce your new book?
Sure. Um, my background is business and marketing, and I came to all this wellness stuff, like so many people in this space, through my own saga of figuring out my health and my weight. And for the last 18, if I'm at, yeah, 18 years, I've been a health and lifestyle coach working with people one-on-one and in small groups. And my specialty is metabolic health, cardiovascular health, blood sugar balance. But of course, we also deal with movement and sleep and stress and food sensitivities and all the other stuff in life that makes this not quite so easy. Right. And so my podcast is called Salad with a Side of Fries. The new book is called Uncomplicating Wellness. And the book really comes from all of the questions that people have sent me over the last few years and recognizing that really the current situation is that nobody needs more information. In fact, everyone is on information overload. And the truth is, what we need is a filter through which we can evaluate all of the information coming at us. Because so often, every day we can see 25 different conflicting pieces of information, and that leaves us trying to follow everything and inherently following nothing and feeling frustrated, like we're the problem. And the reality is nothing is wrong with you. And so really the book is designed to, as the subtitle says, quiet the noise so that we can hear ourselves again and start to really put the foundation in place, because that's what really moves the needle toward health and well-being, however it is that, each one of us defines it.
Well, I totally agree because I think there is, between, what you see in the media, what you hear on the radio, what you see on social media, there are so many messages coming your way. And I know I'm guilty
Yes.
going, that looks interesting. I don't have time to read that now. I'll save that for later. I'll save that for later. I'll read that email later. And then, 400 emails in your inbox and you feel a bit overwhelmed and you're just like, I'm just going to delete them all. Like, you know what I mean? You just don't do
Right.
anything.
Or we don't read the details. We read the headline and go, oh, what I'm doing is wrong. And we see a headline and make different decisions just based on the headline alone, or based on whatever our friend is doing or what somebody else is doing. And it often, you know, is what leads us to that frustration and that overwhelm.
And I think, when it comes to wellness, so many people sort of think like wellness means a certain thing. So to them, it might mean being thin, being able to fit into a certain size pair of jeans, seeing a celebrity looking a certain way. So what does, wellness mean to you, or what is the sort of message that you hope people start to think wellness is?
Yeah, and we address this right at the beginning of the book. And I ask everybody to really define wellness for themselves. I define wellness as really energy to show up in life the way I want to show up, being kind, you know, being able to do the things that I want to do, whether that's travel or spend time with people or, and make an impact. Like if we are dragging ourselves out of bed or we find it hard to convince ourselves to get out of bed, we're not well, even if our body is a certain size. And so, really, it's expanding that definition of wellness beyond the scale, beyond the size or shape of your body, and to say, for each of us, like, what is being well to you? And then, even keeping that in mind as we get all of this new information to say, wait a minute, is this helping them achieve what I'm looking to achieve? Because I think, to your point, like we assume that everybody thinks this means the same thing. And it doesn't, nor does it have to. I think the bigger piece is for us to decide for ourselves. And so for me, that's energy and ability to live well and live long, like all of those pieces combined. It's really a quality of life thing, I think.
Mm. And as you said, everybody wants different things from their lives. They want to be able to do different things. Someone that may be wanting to run an marathon is probably going to have a different definition than someone that, wants to be able to play with their grandkids.
Exactly. And for what it's worth, like you don't have to want to run a marathon to be well. Like if that's not on your list, it doesn't mean you're not well. I think so often we can get into that judgment place too with, I had this conversation with a client earlier today of like, well, but other people. And it's like, well, I don't know that they're relevant to this moment in this conversation, so everybody gets to choose that. And personally, I'm not choosing a marathon.
No, I'm not either. I am a runner, don't get me wrong, but everybody, when people hear that you're a runner, they're like, "Oh, so you're going to run a marathon?" I'm like, "No, I don't have any want to run a marathon."
Right. I'm impressed that you're a runner. I'm not even a runner at all. Like,
But that's it. And I think that's
yeah.
where, your book comes in just to highlight to people that, there is a general, you want to live for long, you want to have a great quality of life, but how that expands for you is going to be very different to the person next to you.
Yes, exactly.
And when it comes to diet culture, it's been around for a long time. It's changed a lot over the years. It hasn't. You know what I mean? Like there's still those same messages coming through that were coming through in the 80s. We still see the same pictures of those thin bodies. But I think nowadays there's just a lot more of it because we have a lot more exposure. We have devices in our hands all the time that give us news and updates that we didn't previously have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we've sort of come full circle in diet culture, um, back to a place of thin at all costs, and that is the most important thing. And I think, we can talk more about that and the role of GLP-1s and that kind of stuff and, pharmaceuticals in this space. So I think that plays a role. The other thing is because, to your point, it's everywhere. And because we are learning more and more and more, and, whether, especially at a certain age, it's hormone replacement therapy and cold plunges and all of these things, it's almost like what now we think of and experience as wellness culture is really just the new version of what we used to call diet culture. And so I think starting to put that in its place for ourselves mentally is really helpful so that we don't start to get down on ourselves about maybe not doing a cold plunge or doing a cold plunge for 30 seconds, not 6 minutes, or, on and on and on, or whatever it is. So there's a lot of pieces to this that fundamentally come back to what we were saying before of deciding for ourselves what wellness is, to recognize everything coming at us for what that is. Like I have a chapter in the book about digesting nutrition news and how do we sort of put on our critical thinking caps again to say, maybe I don't need to just accept every piece of information that's coming at me. And then to speak to this piece of diet culture and GLP-1 medications, for some people, these pharmaceuticals are life-changing, truly life-changing. For other people, maybe we don't necessarily have the rest of the biomarkers that would qualify us for some of these pharmaceuticals, and we decide to take them anyway. They can, and I started this research, goodness, it was probably 2022, I want to say. I maybe did the first episode on my show talking about them. And at that time, I was looking into like, well, what about the people who are taking it purely for that vanity piece, where they aren't necessarily biochemically in need? And frankly, what I found is that it increases what we call all-cause mortality, or in the research, that's what they say for increased chance of death from anything. And so it comes back to, what is it that we're trying to achieve? There are 0 diseases that exist only in larger bodies. So if our objective is health and health span, then the question becomes how we get to that smaller body is the difference maker versus just ending up at that other size and shape. And socially, we had, I don't know if you guys had it there, but there was certainly the movement of like health at every size.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
and some of these, campaigns and different brands that would use, I hate to even use this phrase, but I don't know how else to say it, but like fuller figured models, right? Or real life bodies, in their campaigns and things like that. And that was tremendously helpful for people to see people who look like them. And part of that evolution included people talking about how a lot of this stuff is biochemical, that it's not a moral failure, that it's not all willpower. There's chemistry in the body that creates different body sizes and shapes. And there was the social perception that if somebody was in a bigger body, that was a them problem. That it was, again, like this moral failure or a choice or you did this kind of a thing. And so there was a pendulum swing away from that. And my real concern with all of this in diet culture now with the GLP-1s is that we have come back to that. That now that we have a quote unquote magic bullet, now that there is this pharmaceutical, and currently there are shots, pills that do the same thing are around the corner. And so now that there are these options, we're back to that place of other people judging the situation as, again, a choice, and that there's something wrong with you if you're not taking those medications.
And also,
so that's,
I was going to say on the flip side of that, there's also people judging people that if you are taking a GLP-1, that's the only way you can lose weight. Like you've had to rely on that to be able to lose weight.
Right. Right. There's just so much around it on every side of the, equation that makes it really complicated. And again, I think if we could just come back to like, what is health for us? And, sort of a tangent, there are botanical and herbal ingredients that can help, sort of activate our own GLP-1 and give us some of these benefits without the muscle wasting, without as much of, some of the other side effects and things like that that, just aren't part of our typical doctor's tool belt. So I think there's a lot around education that we still need and to be having these conversations because every part of this story, there's some sort of stigma.
For sure. And I totally agree with you. I've had a couple of clients that were actually scared to go on the GLP-1s because of things that they've, read and seen. And, I just said to them, you need to speak to your doctor. You need to look at where you're at, what's best for you. One client has gone on them recently. She struggled and the way she put it was when she went on the GLP-1, she just said that background noise of wanting to, telling her to eat all the time just disappeared. And she struggled with losing weight pretty much her whole life. And this is the first time that she's lost weight, feels really good, is adding strength training, is educating herself about eating healthy, is staying on a very low dose for the GLP-1, but she was very scared to go on it because she'd heard so many things that it could be very bad.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, for some people, it is life changing. And to the point of this client, too, right? Alone may not be the answer to everything. It can be one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And I think that's where when you've got
Yeah,
good practitioners around you, people that you can talk to, get good advice from, and tailored advice for where you're at in your health, your age, your history, that's where it really comes into play.
totally. Yeah.
Now, a lot of people, are sometimes confused, over which, way of eating is better. Should I be leaning into paleo? Should I be, leaning into, fasting, and that type of thing? When it comes to that, what's your advice to people to sort of find the right one for them?
Yeah. So a lot of it comes back to backing up to what is fundamentally human about our bodies, right? Last I checked, we're all humans, which is cool, right? Check the box. We know certain things about how the human body works and what it needs. And it fundamentally needs nutrients. So whether you feel better when your nutrient breakdown is weighted more toward protein and fats than carbohydrates, or you feel better weighted more toward, you know, high fiber carbohydrates, which by the way is frankly human and everyone, right? There are pieces of this that are really individual. What I caution people of is not looking at the nuance of some of these different approaches. So a lot of times, especially when it comes to intermittent fasting, fundamentally, I like it better for biologically male bodies than female bodies. And if we're ultimately using it as a way to cut calories because there are just fewer hours in the day of eating, then I caution you to say, is this the approach that's getting us to the outcomes we're looking for? Frankly, because our body needs nutrients and a variety of nutrients, if your plan has you permanently cutting out entire food groups, permanently, opting out of life or participating in life events because of your food plan, right? If your food plan doesn't allow for life, it's not your plan for life. And what we are looking for, if your objective is health span and energy and vitality and longevity and all of those things, then what we're looking for is a plan that we can be consistent with over the long haul. And so that comes down to protein, fiber, quality fat, right? Getting those micronutrients as well. By the way, for everybody who's afraid of carbohydrates, vegetables and fruit are carbohydrates, Carbohydrates are the preferred fuel of the body. And we want to be getting those carbohydrates from those quality sources that also offer vitamins and minerals and these other nutrients. So consider if the plan that you're following is providing all of these building blocks, and your cravings are a really powerful indicator of what we're missing. So oftentimes when we're craving sugar, it's really because we're undereating protein. When we have low blood sugar, when we're hangry, when we need fuel, when our brain says, I need fuel and I need it fast, what does the body crave? Well, sugar is fast fuel. So, of course, we're craving breads, pasta, baked goods, chips, cookies, right? A piece of candy, all of those things that give us fuel to the brain very quickly. So, I don't necessarily believe that it's one size fits all for everybody. And there are a few pieces that are fundamentally human to keep our blood sugar stable, to make sure we're getting all the things that we need every day, and to start to understand food as one of the most valuable tools for our health is really the piece. And to start, the book is not a how-to. It's really a way of saying there are certainly tips and ideas and things to play with so that you can start to tweak. And I just caution anybody when it comes to something that, like, if you couldn't live this way for the rest of your life, maybe we're not going to start that now. Maybe that's not our best plan.
But I think that's where so many of the sort of diet plans as such out there are like, stick with this for 2 weeks, kick off with this for 1 week or 2 weeks. But really, it needs to be about the long-term habits that you're changing, that you're going to be able to do consistently over time rather than it just be a 2-week cleanup and then we're done.
Absolutely. And the thing is like, if we think about it back to that diet culture perspective, right? Back to the world of a multi-billion-dollar industry, whoever they is that created this plan that you're buying the thing from, right, needs you to get quick results. Those quick results may not happen in a way that creates long-term health because their objective is quick results. So it goes back to that thing we talked about before of like, well, what's my objective and what's the objective of this thing, whether it's a product, a plan, or whatever. And so if those things are not aligned, we want to cue into that. So their objective is for us to get quick results, not necessarily long-lasting results. And the more times that we lose that weight, in air quotes, right? Whatever it is, the more times that we go on and off this plan and yo-yo back and forth, over time, what that creates is dysregulation in the body. So again, that may not be a problem if your objective is the event you have in 2 weeks and you don't really care. Cool, right? The rest of this is probably very frustrating to you to listen to. But if we're looking for that long-term health, then we want to start to look at some other options.
And when it comes to creating consistency with, people's healthy habits, sometimes people find that really hard. People often say to me, Kate, I'm an all-in person, like as in I'm all in. I clear out all the junk food from my house. There's no treats, there's no nothing, because if there's something, then I just give it all up and, I'm off the bandwagon, so to speak. So what advice do you have for people that are trying to create consistency in their healthy habits?
Absolutely. So one piece is, that intensity, that all-in intensity is infinitely more difficult to maintain. So consistency and intensity are inversely related. The more intense something is, the more challenging it is to be consistent with it. And vice versa. The less intense, the easier it is to be consistent with it. And we know this, right? Because we know that we have to move our bodies every day. It's not like we can be like, oh no, Kate, I don't have to come do Pilates with you. I went to recess once in second grade. Right? Like, and when we hear it in that context, we think it sounds so silly. So we want to start to think about that now and recognize that really our health is a function of the seemingly small things that we do every single day, not about the thing that happens one time or for 1 week or for 1 month. And maybe it's 1 month every year, right? So then, okay, maybe that's happened for 40 months. Well, how many months has it not happened over those years or whatever it is, right? So as we start to focus on consistency, we want to start to think about what are things that we could do every single day, day in and day out, on our most hectic, stressful, chaotic day. Not on that textbook perfect day that maybe happens once a year, right? Or a couple times a year. So if we start to plan for the chaos and the hectic day, and then a day that's less so, we can level up a little bit, or maybe have time for an extra thing, fantastic. But that on-off pendulum swing is inherently the opposite of consistency. Because I don't know, I mean, I'm type A, I'm a doer, right? And how many of us go, doing a million things, and then we have that day where we plop on the couch and we are a complete vegetable. And we need those days. And it's interesting because that is just as all or nothing as we approach sometimes our food or our activity. And so really the body is better equipped to handle a Hershey Kiss every day than it is to handle a textbook perfect day, week, month, followed by a day, week, month of, eating, sorry, I just hit the mic, of eating every single thing in sight, right? So the body can handle certain things. I think sometimes mentally we can't because we have these expectations, or we're not putting other things in place that allow us to put that Hershey Kiss in perspective. If
And
that makes sense.
yeah, totally. And I think that kind of mindset piece and maybe the beliefs that we've been brought up with, what springs to mind is like Christmas Day, where everybody is like, oh, it's Christmas, so I can eat as much as I want on this day. And everybody, I have those memories where everybody after dinner is like falling asleep and all the rest of it because they've eaten so much. And it was like,
Yeah.
it's okay to do that on this day because it's Christmas. Those beliefs that we've been brought up with influence, our mindset around food as well.
For sure. And for what it's worth, too, I mean, maybe a controversial opinion, but we didn't get here because of Christmas. We got here because we had days like that over and over and over. Like, I don't think finding joy and, connection around food is the enemy either. And to your point, too, of all the things that we've been brought up with, and then the diet culture that tells us, yes, enjoying food is part of the problem. That like it would be easier if I didn't like the taste of cookies. And it's like, well, what? Right? We all like cookies, and that's okay. And so for the most part, but so there isn't a culture in the world that doesn't connect over food, that doesn't grieve with food in some way, right? It's such an integral part of our lives that's okay too. It's about recognizing it's a holiday, versus a holla week, a holla month, a holla year, right? And being able to put that in perspective with everything else. Because sometimes connecting to those memories is maybe the most health supporting thing we can do.
Mm. And so many of my memories relate around food. Like if we talk about previous holidays,
Yeah,
my husband always jokes because I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that place. That's where we had that awesome gelato, and your memory is linked
totally.
to that food experience.
Yeah. And I think there's something magical about that too. And, and maybe that's part of the resistance that we have to, having those things or trying, that like we're afraid to connect around those things because if we do, then maybe it takes on this larger than life size place. And so it almost comes back to your point with the mindset and all of the other pieces. Like it's not just our food. It's why there's 6 pieces of the bio stack in Uncomplicating Wellness, because hyper focusing on one at the expense of the others doesn't necessarily get us to that well-rounded health and wellness either.
Mm. And I want to segue as we sort of start
Yeah.
to run out of time. But in the book, you share a story where you receive an obesity score on a genetic test. And if I just wonder if you can kind of share a bit about that, and how that made you kind of understand, genetic predispositions and things. I think that would be really enlightening for the listeners.
Absolutely. So, um, the book talks about both genetics and epigenetics, right? So, genetics, we're all pretty familiar with, it's the stuff we inherit from our family. Epigenetics is essentially what we bathe our genes in, which is our lifestyle. Or if you think of the old puppets that had strings, you know, it's like the genetics are the body and the strings. Our epigenetics are what pull at the strings and make the body move. So essentially, what we learn is that with lifestyle, we can turn up and turn down the volume on different genes. So in my practice, I used to work with this genetic test that was specifically about, it was focused a lot on metabolic health, blood sugar, weight management, cardiovascular health, and movement, fitness, a lot of these lifestyle pieces. So part of the test, it was like a cheek swab, right? And then they look at all of these variations of different genes. And they would give you an obesity score of like 0 out of 10. I was an 8.6 out of 10. Genetically, I crave certain foods. I crave the sugary foods. I crave the carby foods. I have a propensity to those flavors. And so, on the one hand, it was sort of validating because it was like, oh, no wonder why at times in my life I felt like I could breathe and gain weight. And then the other side of it was like, no wonder why, too, I feel like I put in so much effort and other people don't necessarily have to put in the same amount of effort, right? That there is something genetic here. And if I didn't do all of the things I do between, certainly it is what I do for a living now, but, the food choices and the movement and focusing on my sleep and managing the stress and learning to meditate and all of these other pieces, that my health outcomes would be in a very different place. And so there's a piece of it that's validating and that's really empowering. Because when we recognize that even our genetics are not a life sentence, it opens the door and says, well, wait a minute, I can direct my health. I can direct my life. And the human genome is 99.9% the same, that 0.1% that's different turns out to be dramatic.
That's it. But I love how you sort of had the two sides. You know what I mean? That, it is
Yeah.
validating, but it's also empowering because I think sometimes when we get a little bit frustrated with maybe the way things are going with our health, that we do go, oh, it is genetics. It is, we blame it on the genetics. But there are things, in that lifestyle piece that we can do that can really make a difference. And sometimes it's just kind of maybe picking one thing and a small thing and starting with that so that you don't get overwhelmed, but that you do, at the end of the day, have a lot of power over your health.
1,000%. And, if that's one thing that people take away from this book, is that our health is really up to each of us to create. That as incredible as our doctors are, it's not up to them. It's not up to modern medicine and science to figure it all out, right? It's up to us to do those seemingly small things each day.
100%. And if there are sort of people listening in, and they are feeling a bit overwhelmed and maybe they have, been trying, this type of diet and that type of eating and they're just feeling a bit overwhelmed with it all, what's your advice of, where they can start?
Yeah, well, first of all, the book Uncomplicating Wellness is a great place to start to help ditch all the rules, come back to ourselves a little bit. And it isn't one place to start for everybody. So the six pieces are, right, we have that nutrition, movement, hydration, sleep, stress, and connection. And the thing I would say is, which one to start with because it's the one where, as you heard it, you went, "Ooh," right? It's the one that you kind of reacted to. That's the one to start with. And then play with something that you can fit into your day that addresses that thing on your most chaotic, stressful, packed day. Maybe that's one of my favorite things is called DWDS, drink water, do squats, right? We drink our water. That's inevitably going to make us have to use the restroom. Each time we go to the restroom, we do 5 to 10 squats, holding on to the sink, or stand up and sit down from the toilet 5 times before you finish, right? Like something that moves us in the direction related to one of those pieces, and let that help create some momentum. Don't have to overhaul everything overnight because remember, we're in it for the long haul. So let it take the time so that it sticks.
Yes, well, when you were going through those six, for me, it's connection. I'm like, I've got my movement dialed in, I've got my nutrition dialed in, and not always I think of connection with other people. I've got two kids, I'm running a business, it is trying to find that time to connect with other people, but it's also finding the time to connect with myself and maybe connecting just to my breath when I'm having, a stressful day. So I think of that sort of connection piece around to your own body, but then also with others.
Yes, exactly. So with connection, we talk about laughter and hugs and holding hands and having those moments of quiet, whether, quiet to connect with ourselves, quiet to just be with the people that we're with, so that we have that community. It's one of the most powerful things for longevity that I think is probably the most overlooked.
And in this day and age, with the rise of devices, computers,
Yes.
AI, even though we have the capacity to be connected, more easily than ever, it is becoming more and more isolated because people are not getting together in person as much as they used to, and they are leading into just, being on their phone rather than talking to that stranger that's sitting next to you, waiting for an appointment. I think that's where
Totally.
life is really changing.
Absolutely. And it's similar with sleep, where what we perceive And stress too, right? Like what we perceive as quality sleep versus what the body experiences as quality sleep. What we perceive as stressful versus what the body experiences as stressful. What we perceive as connection versus what the body experiences as connection are very different. And so, the next time you're around other people, just notice how different that feels compared to scrolling Instagram.
Mm. Good thing to for people to check up on. Have a look
Yeah,
if you're wearing one of your smart watches, you can check out what your heart rate's doing too.
absolutely.
Now, before we finish up, where can people reach out, connect with you, and find out more about your book?
For sure. So, podcast is Salad with a Side of Fries. Website is a salad with a side of fries.com. The book is called Uncomplicating Wellness. For international, Amazon is probably the easiest place. Um, but my website, a salad with a side of fries.com, has all of your options there for where you can purchase.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on for the second time. And I wish you all the best with the book. So, listeners, head out. I'll link up all those show notes so you can check out Jenn's book and grab it. And, Christmas is coming up. So, this is a great Christmas present, even, for yourself, to kickstart, a new year and, dive into really focusing on you.
Absolutely. Kate, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to chat with you as always.